So here is a description of someone in our audience. She is analytical. She is accomplished. She is a person that others come to when they have a problem that is difficult and the stakes are really high, and she's exhausted in a way that you cannot ordinarily explain. Not tired from the lack of sleep, but depleted from sustained effort of being the person that everyone else clarity depends on. So most wellness advisors or something that she's read or received over the years, it's been too generic to be useful or even too remote and removed from her kind of reality, her professional life, her credibility. She needs something that respects her intelligence. She needs something that is grounded in science. She needs something that it's actually short enough to fit between two meetings. So my guest today is a former research scientist who identified that description in herself, left a STEM career, and built a coaching practice around one of the most counterintuitive therapy um, fields. So it's no longer a hobby for you, Lexi, as a precision tool. You're talking about a precision tool for nervous systems restoration and clear thinking. Lexi Reed, you are welcome to the Clarity Mandate as we begin to dig deep into this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Vivian. So, yes, I totally identified with that audience member you were describing. And, I'm sure there's many in the audience that they're juggling all the things. They're juggling the career, they're juggling looking after children, maybe they're looking after elderly parents. Often I've heard it nicknamed the sandwich generation because we're bookended by all these responsibilities. And, we feel that we can't let any of these balls drop. They're all glass. We don't want to drop any of the balls.
Wow. Wow.
Hold
Just
that thought.
let me start from the beginning. You left a research science career to become a creative wellness coach. Most research scientists that leave STEM move towards something more technical or something more strategic, but you moved towards creativity and well-being. What happened inside your own experience as a scientist that made that particular direction feel like the right one?
Well, for me, I've always been between science and art, but my parents very much encouraged me when I went off to university to choose science because they felt you could always do art on the side. It was hard to do science on the side. They felt it was obviously a better bet. So I did the bachelor's, I did the master's, I did the PhD, I did the postdoc, I went into science. And I've worked in academia, I've worked at the federal government, I've worked in corporate with consulting. But for me, it was this entrepreneurial journey that I've embraced now. And yes, I was trying to find a way to marry my two passions. It felt like I was always cutting off part of myself, or people were always surprised if I was a scientist. How could I be an artist? Or the people that knew me as an artist, how could you be a scientist? They couldn't reconcile these two halves. And what I found for myself, I hit burnout during the pandemic. Like a lot of women, I was working from home. My children were home. So we were trying to balance. One was in middle school, one had just started high school. And, trying to juggle teaching them, running my Zoom meetings, being there for the family. I don't think if people remember, but often you had to volunteer one person to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
So I was the one wearing the mask, doing the grocery shopping. And it was just so many things. And my husband had actually come back from work a day early, so he claimed our home office downstairs. So I ended up having a small folding table and a folding chair in my bedroom with my laptop kind of balanced. And that was my office for the next 2.5 years. And I'm sure that rings a bell for a lot of women, and
Mhm.
art was my escape. And I found during the pandemic, I would go and I couldn't even create. Like I felt totally blocked. And a lot of that I realized in hindsight now is I was burned out. And when you're burned out, it's like everything is in shades of gray. Nothing lights you up. You're tired, you're irritable, you snap at people, and you aren't yourself. And what's interesting is that it was on one of these endless Zoom calls that I just started drawing repetitive shapes. And I was never a big doodler. Like I was a bit of an art snob. For me, like doodling, like why don't you actually go paint a real picture? And what was funny is that I started to relax. I got kind of into this repetitive Zen feeling. And I thought, okay, there's something here. I'm a scientist. I'm going to figure out. So I started researching art therapy, and that led me to creative coaching, and that led me to wellness. And I understood that people could be creative as a wellness technique. And that's what I started building my
Wow,
coaching practice on.
wow,
And it was
that's
simple techniques. Like we're not talking Mona Lisa, we're talking like Pictionary level drawing.
wow, wow. That's super powerful. You make that case from experience to actually creating a solution. And I want you to go even deeper. I want you to make the scientific case for stress relief tools, not just the intuitive case, but you've already talked about your personal testimony, the Nevers system. I want you to go deeper into the neuroscience case. What is actually happening in the brain when someone does a simple drawing, an
It's
exercise?
being a scientist, I started looking into the neuroscience of this. In fact, I took a certificate in the neuroscience of coaching. And again, I wanted to marry these worlds of what's happening in your brain when you're doing these creative exercises. And the brain works in different ways. There's the executive mode where it's the higher level, it's the logic, it's reacting to things. And then there's the default mode network, and that's more like the rest and relax state. It's more the autonomous breathing. They talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, right? So you've got your fight or flight, that's your executive mode kicking in. Like it's strategizing, it's figuring the way out fastest. And then you've got the parasympathetic where it's much more the rhythmic. It's you don't think about your breathing. It's you're just breathing, your digestion is just happening regularly. Everything is just ticking along in a rhythm. And what I found from doing these simple drawing exercises, and you build up to them, like you start with simple shapes and patterns, and then you start getting more analytical later on and reflecting on your work. But just that act of moving your hand on paper starts tapping into that default mode network. If you were to draw in time to your breathing, you would find your breathing would actually slow down and your hand movements would slow down. There's a feedback loop happening there. And suddenly your shoulders will drop, your breathing slows down. It's very grounding. And that was just a very simple exercise. 2 to 5 minutes, you can do that. And suddenly you'll find yourself more relaxed.
Wow, that's super impressive. You chose deliberately and to say you are better placed to heal the person that you once were. And it's not surprising to me that you work mostly with, or maybe exclusively with women in STEM. You're talking about scientists, engineers, analysts, technical leaders. What is it about that population? I know you come from that population that makes creative wellness tools both maybe more needed by that population and maybe more useful in that population than in other groups from your market analysis or your decision making in selecting that group.
Well, for me, definitely there was the authenticity. Like, I am a woman in STEM. As I said, I've worked in numerous fields. I've seen often they're quite male dominated. Certainly, engineering certainly is. Life sciences more equal, mathematics typically more male, finance more male. So, technical, I'd say, is again, depending on the fields, more of an even split. But even so, there's still that big, there's a lot of what they call invisible labor. And women quite are often almost voluntold to be on committees. They're expected to pick up extra work, stay late, come in early. And whether that's cultural, a lot of us are conditioned to people please. We were good students in school. We want to do well. We don't want to let people down. And so we'll take on all these additional labor on top of our actual job.
And maybe even to prove that we belong to that room, because sometimes these are rooms that women have always been outside, and you've got to prove that you belong there. And sometimes that's the pressure.
It is. In fact, I had exactly that happen. We were sitting around a board table, and one of my colleagues, female colleagues, came late because she was running from another meeting. And she pulled up the corner chair in the furthest corner of the boardroom. And I actually stopped the meeting because I knew she had some contributions I wanted the client to hear. And I told her to bring her chair up to the table. And everyone just looked at me
Wow.
like, why are you stopping the meeting to do that? And I was like, no, because she has valuable things to say,
Her
and I
voice.
want her at the table.
Wow.
And what's interesting is she actually left the company, and she said during her exit survey, and she told me this confidentially, she's like, I brought up that moment in my mind of when, physically brought me to the table. And I said,
Wow.
nobody else was doing that.
Wow.
And it's sad that we don't do that more often, or that it needs to happen, I think, is making actual space for women in the room. And yeah, it is hard. It is definitely hard that to prove ourselves, this attention to detail, the perfectionism. So yeah, no, I work with a lot of women because I've seen these struggles come up time and time again. And it happens at all stages. I work with women who are earlier in their career. They're just starting their masters, they're just starting their PhDs, they're applying to med school. And then I've worked with women who are mid career and are hitting that stuck moment of, do I want to keep doing what I'm doing because I'm good at it, but I'm not feeling joy in it anymore? And then I worked with women who are on their fifth or sixth career, and now they're going out on their own with their knowledge. So
Wow.
but these insecurities pop up at each stage. And so that's why I really do like working with women in STEM. Definitely, it's the niche that I've landed in, essentially.
Wow, that's amazing. And being the niche that you are most experienced in, over 2 decades in that niche as a practitioner yourself, and now providing the kind of solutions and targeting women, that's quite impressive. And I hope someone out there who's been wondering, I need something specific to women in STEM, and you're listening to this episode, you got Lexi, she got you, and she can really be able to assist you with the models. But you describe women in leadership as often carrying an invisible cognitive and emotional load, appearing accomplished on the outside while they are exhausted internally. For me, that gap between the external performance and the internal state itself, it's really something that needs some cognitive work. How does maintaining that gap actually affect decision making for women specifically? And talk about decision making over time, quality of decision making, and what does your research say about where it eventually breaks you down?
Oh, it's like the boiling water and the frog scenario. It doesn't happen overnight, right? It adds up. It, and at least it did for me, and certainly my research in burnout and stress management shows it adds up. And the biggest issue with dealing with burnout is the fact that it's recovery from burnout. You're never, it's like any other ism. You don't get over burnout because it comes out of habits, right? So you have to learn new patterns. And this is where the brain comes in, is the neuroplasticity, right?
Wow.
We have to build new patterns for ourselves. We can't have that immediate feeling of saying yes to everything because that's our default setting. And when I work with a lot of these women, we start trying to be very conscious about decisions. You're right. Like, do you actually want to take this task on? Do you have bandwidth? Can you say no? Can you delegate? But you're so quick to make a snap decision and you just want it to move on to the next task that you don't actually spend time to consider options. Even just giving yourself permission. That's another big part of what I work on with my women, is giving yourself permission to say no and being confident in that decision. And that's hard when your confidence in your decision making is being eroded. So,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, boundaries is another boundary setting. That's another thing that we work on very heavily because if you don't have boundaries that people respect, then you're not going to be able to do things that you want to do and do things that you don't want to do, right? It's because people are not going to respect your boundaries if
Mm.
you don't respect them as well. And we try to develop new patterns so you don't slip into the bad habits that led to the burnout in the first place.
Wow, that's powerful. You need to set boundaries. You need to learn to say no. You need to learn to delegate. I mean, Lexi is pouring out all these, and this episode will not give us enough time to explore, but we're going to be putting her details in the show notes so you can get more. I mean, you are in leadership and you're suffering from all kinds of burnouts. You want to speak to the professionals, but you say clarity does not come from pushing harder. You say that is a direct challenge for me to lots of dominant culture of most high performance professionals in that we've seen over the years, where pushing harder is the primary response of any performance gap. You need to do more. I want you to make the neuroscience case. What does pushing harder actually do to the cognitive system that produce what could be the impact? Think about clear thinking. And why does it consist of underperformance when you have to push harder instead of really dealing with the root cause? I want you to speak to that.
Well, definitely. The biggest thing is that you're almost flooding. A lot of what happens is that stress response, right? Like we are meant as human beings, we've evolved to deal with stress and then move on. And the problem is, as we continued with these stressors, whether it's an animal coming out to get us, in the modern world, we're identifying everything as a threat, and we don't ever lower our cortisol levels. Essentially, all the things that are flooding your body, right? It's you're just bathing your brain and your organs and everything and just stress hormones over and over again. And yeah, that literally will put wear and tear on your system. The biggest thing, like I look at when I go walk my dog, and he's a little neurotic, so he gets nervous when, strangers walk by him or dog. Basically, anybody walks by him. And he starts pulling at the leash and he starts pulling away and pulling away. And then finally, when the danger passes, he shakes himself all over and he walks off. And it's like, that's it. He literally shook the stress off.
Wow.
We don't do that. We don't shake it off. We carry it with us. In fact, we basically keep, if you think of shopping bags, we're putting in, oh, here's a $5 stressor, here's a $10 stressor. We're just carrying these bags of stress with us wherever we go. And we
Wow.
just keep adding to them. We don't put them down until eventually we're forced to put them down. And that could be basically a breakdown. That's where your body can actually. I had a client who she started losing her hair, she started losing her fingernails, like just her body was rebelling against her, literally saying, you have to stop. I've had other folks who just can't sleep anymore because they go to bed thinking about work. They wake up in the middle of the night thinking about work. They get up to go to work and they haven't slept. And all of these things take a toll on your nervous system over time.
Wow, that is so impressive. We are in the world now, talk about AI and productivity, and people keep pushing like, oh, now I can do the work of five people now, and people keep pushing those boundaries. But that's quite important. How your body would, if you don't hit the call deliberately, your body will signal you with the things that you're actually talking about. But I want you to zoom again into drawing. I know you spoke about drawing before, not just journaling, not just talking, not just exercise, but visual creative activities. That is part of the things that you really do as a central piece of your practice. Why drawing?
I was going to say, why drawing? I can tell you why.
Yeah, let's go.
It taps into a different part of your brain. There are things that we find it very hard to put into words. So journaling is great. In fact, sometimes I talk about drawing as visual journaling, but there are certain things that we can symbolize very quickly with a visual symbol. Literally, that's something personal to us. Like you can also put it into colors, you can put it into shapes, and they'll symbolize things that are very personal to you. I give the example of a red balloon. You can picture a red balloon in your head, and maybe the first image you're thinking is, oh, what about that Banksy drawing with the little girl holding the red balloon? You know, this silhouette of the sweet little girl holding a red balloon. But if you've seen Stephen King's It, maybe it's a creepy clown holding a red balloon, and that's a totally different image. And it
Mhm.
comes down to context, it comes down to your experience. Like we all experience the world differently. And so when you're putting things onto paper and it's a drawing and it just means something to you, you can come back and you will feel and remember how you felt in that moment. What were you feeling? What were you thinking about? And with a lot of the women, what we do is we'll go through the exercise, we'll do the drawing, and they'll put it away for a few days. And then I'll say, come back to it and let's see, what didn't you put in the drawing? What did you wish you added to the drawing? What do you see now that you didn't see before? Make notes on it. And then I do follow ups with them 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later. And if they open up that portfolio of these drawings, they can see where they were then and then see where they are now. So it's that combination of sort of tapping into that visual side, that symbolic side, but also then taking that analytical time to reflect. And that's what the real power comes. That's why I call it coaching as opposed to art therapy. Coaching is very future focused, goal oriented. It's proactive versus reactive. So I use a lot of art therapy inspired techniques, but then the coaching comes from that forward focus and moving forward.
Wow, that is really, really powerful. And let's imagine a senior leader, a female leader, your typical client in STEM in our audience, a woman that is running complex organizational systems and it's building, whether it's her private business or a huge conglomerate. And she has 5 minutes between breaks and meetings, and she's in a state of kind of a low grade chronic stress that she's been managing for months. And I'd like you to give her some of the effective, maybe tools or tips that she can do in 5 minutes to restore that internal condition that can really improve her thinking for the next meeting. Something she could do in 5 minutes.
Oh, there's an easy exercise called batteries that I do. And basically, you just take a quick piece of paper, draw maybe 3 to 5 rectangles. So these are your batteries. And each battery is something that's going on in your life, whether it's work or a challenge or a problem. And easiest thing to do is just scribble where you're feeling. Are you feeling 20% filled? Are you feeling 50% filled? And just make a couple of notes like, what would bring this up? Like, what would up the energy level? Or worse, what's depleting it? Can you identify what's bringing it down? And what can you do to change it? And it's like a visual mind map of kind of where your energy levels are going and where you want to shift them. So it's sort of seeing what the problem is, drawing it out, and then where do you want to shift it and what choice can you make to think about it there? And that's a really quick and easy way of doing that.
Wow, that's impressive. Thank you for sharing that tip with us. That's quite an interesting perspective there. But you are a researcher, I call it former researcher or still current researcher, because I believe in the work you do, you still do some research, though not as a career like you used to be in academia and other things that you did before. But that kind of a background gives you something that many wellness professionals do not have, your experience, the capability that you have to evaluate evidence from your background to your current practice and the credibility that you have. I believe it's stronger than most in the field. So, how do you think about the quality of the research base for creativity based stress interventions right now? What is well established, what is promising, and what is proven. Maybe even what you're still uncertain about, or not sure about in the field.
Well, it's interesting because obviously much comes back to diet and exercise, the things we're always told. And it's funny, the women I work with, we're all smart. We all know that we should eat better. We all know we should exercise. We all know, right? And yet none of us do it. And again, it's about giving yourself that's always on the back burner. We always put ourselves last. And it does come down to building those boundaries. And it's funny, there's a lot of research supporting mindfulness, right? But part of mindfulness is actually taking that time to think about it. And we often don't do that. And I tried doing meditation. And for me, meditation, it works sometimes, but not all times. But I found if I was doing these drawings, because it was that sense of being, my hand was being active, I could kind of quiet the monkey mind, the chatter in my brain by putting it onto paper. And then the nice thing is then you can step outside of it because it's on paper. It's out of your brain, right?
That's right.
And so again, that's just for me a nice way of distancing yourself from some of the issues that are just swirling around in your brain. But the nice thing with coaching is then you get to talk about it with either your coach, or often I run group sessions and we talk as a community and we have shared experiences. So I do find there's a big sense, like you can go very deep one on one, but also those group scenarios. Like my ideal is both. Like, have those one-on-one sessions to look at your own issues more deeply, but then also having that shared community where, is shared wisdom. We can exchange, because I don't know everything
That's right.
by any
That's
means.
right.
So
None of us does.
exactly. And there's a lot of smart women in the room, and they may have a different approach that would work for you. So it's, I think a lot of times you just have to see what works for you, right? Like try different things. Like there is no one magic wand to wave, unfortunately. But and certain things will work at certain times in your life and not others. That's the other thing is, especially as women, and I'm entering, perimenopause, menopause, right? All of those hormonal differences affect your sleep and your eating. So as we go through different phases of life, we have to sort of keep that in mind too, that we aren't literally the same people we were 5 years ago either.
Wow, interesting. Interesting. Thank you for sharing that really great insight. So, the Clarity Mandate podcast reached listeners and women across 50 countries and growing the last time we checked. And we reach women, I mean, personally being an African born in the diaspora, we reach women across continents, including Africa and other parts of the world. And guess what? Cultures move from one area, one community, one continent to another. And sometimes the expectations, like you're saying, on women can vary across different contexts, the responsibility, family, community, well being that really extends beyond the professional life of women. And I'd like you to speak to this. Does your framework translate into different contexts? Is it applicable universally, or is it mostly applicable to professional women in STEM in the developed West, for example?
I think anyone can be creative. I think that is just full out, anyone can be creative, and you just channel that creative energy. Maybe you're channeling it into your cooking, maybe you channel it into music. I happen to channel it into visual arts, and I try to make it as simple as possible that other people can tap into their creativity. And from working with different women, they've used it as a springboard. One woman said, "I'm creating all these beautiful meals now because I feel more energized and I want to spend time, you know, doing these entertaining." She didn't let herself do it because she's like, "No, no, I have no time to spend doing this." But she realized she was missing it. She was missing that part because that's how she expressed her creativity. I had another woman who used to do quilts, and she's like, "I haven't picked up a needle and thread and fabric in years." And yet now that I'm doing these drawings, it's like it's kind of like loosening up, you know,
Wow.
things in her brain that suddenly she's looking visually at things. She's like, "Oh, I could see that as a quilt." So these are simple exercises, but they unlock a lot of things that I think, because it gives us that ability to play again, and play is universal. And if you have just a pencil and a piece of paper, you can do a lot with that. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be a lot of materials, but it can lead to other things, which I found really interesting and
Wow.
unexpected. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. So this framework is applicable across contexts, across cultures and creativity, like Lexi puts it. Anyone can be creative. The name of this podcast is the Clarity Mandate. And I believe that there are moments when clarity in everyone's life stop being optional, when a leader's ability to think clearly is not a personal wellness goal, but a responsibility to the people who depend on these leaders' decisions. And you have built an entire practice around restoring the internal conditions for that kind of clarity. What do you understand now about the relationship between the nervous system, the creative mind, and the quality of leadership decisions? And what is it looking at this relationship? How does it work? And how does it make better decisions or make leaders make better decisions? And how has your own experiences make you see the way you see it now, that you might never have seen it in that perspective had you not been through the burnout and all that yourself? It's kind of a long question, but let's give a shot at it.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, creativity starts opening up those floodgates in your mind, right? So suddenly you have new possibilities, a new perspective, a new point of view. So let's say you were, a leader facing a challenge at work, who are you going to promote next, right? And you do the standard pros and cons, but what's interesting if you start maybe doing it visually, maybe you'll do it less linearly, less of a list. Maybe you'll build, one of the things I have as an exercise called the daisy of options. And so it's circular. You start with your question in the middle and you draw these petals that come off of it. So it's radiating out and you can make the petals any size. So you can make them bigger, you can make them smaller. And suddenly your options look very different than if you just listed them as pros and cons. And suddenly that gives you some more options that you may have not considered before. And we're so used to being very linear. We're used to doing checklists. We're used to, knocking things off our to-do list. But, some of the women that they were arguing with me. They're like, but I always do it this way. And I said, well, just try it. Try something different. And they're like, I never would have seen this one option had I not done it this way because it would have never made it on the list.
Wow.
And so it's again just opening up your mind to a different perspective. And it's still you. You're still coming up with the answers. It's just you're giving a different way of tapping into them. So that's my hopefully answer to the long question.
Wow, excellent. This is the Clarity Mandate with me, Dr. Vivian Atud, and today we're having an interesting conversation with our guest here, all the way from Canada, Lexi Reed, and she has moved from science to creative coaching, and you want to learn more about her. Lexi, any last thoughts to our audience and how they can find you or reach you? That would be great.
Yeah. Well, easiest way on the internet, my website is Mind Art Wellness. And there is a free newsletter and also a free creative challenge where you can sign up and basically for 5 days by email, you get a creative activity sent to you. So you get a taste of what it's like to do the creative wellness coaching. And there's some, prompts in there to sort of make you think about your exercise that you've done. And yeah, people are welcome to email me if they want more information as well.
Wow, interesting. You heard her. That is Lexi Reed, former research scientist, creative wellness coach, and a practitioner who has built one of the most, in my estimation, scientifically grounded coaching practice. And I believe that she's doing a great work with women in STEM at the moment with her creative coaching practice. So she didn't have to leave science, she just had to incorporate science into the coaching and the creative work. And she has applied that to problem solving in a way that had never been applied before in a combination. So this helps people across the world, especially women in STEM, to improve their quality of life, improve their thinking, their leadership, their decision making, in different conditions and help them, like she puts it, change their priorities, come up with boundaries and all the nice things that she said. And you want to reach her, we're going to be putting her details in the show notes. And to everyone in our audience, every leader, every woman that is suffering from some form of burnout, and you've been pushing harder to get those goals and targets with less clarity, the mandate is clear. The internal conditions for your clear thinking, it's not a luxury. It's something that you need to focus on. The leadership responsibility for you this week is for you to think about building that internal conditions that can help you excel in your decision making. And this has been the Clarity Mandate. I am Dr. Vivian Atud, and I will see you in the next episode.